And Daniel Manz, you're pointing out that a lot of reporters were silent during the whole WikiLeaks investigation a few years ago, and now it turns out that perhaps that silence may be coming back to haunt a lot of reporters. Explain why.
Well, David, I mean, the same exact issue that is at stake here, perhaps not exactly with the case of James Rosen, but the broader issue of earlier when we found out that the Department of Justice had seized the records of some 20 AP reporters and their conducts over the course of months. Something similar was essentially done to Julian Assange and Bradley Manning, who is now being charged as one of his sources, in the case of WikiLeaks. And in this case, it was actually in Twitter communications, as far as we know. Now, here are the similarities between these cases, and in fact, it is basically that the government was under no obligation, or rather, perhaps they were under an obligation, but they did not notify the reporters in question that they were seizing those records. They didn't let Assange know, or any of the other people on the team at WikiLeaks that they were seizing those records. And the same thing happened with the Associated Press. Now, in the case of the Associated Press, actually, Verizon did not let the Associated Press reporters know that they had agreed to hand over that information, those communications. The reason we found out about the WikiLeaks seizure is because actually Twitter, in that case, took it upon itself to demand that the government narrow the scope of its seizure and to tip off the public and to tip off Assange that these communications had been seized. On the other side, of course, because this is the charges being brought against the United States military officer Bradley Manning for leaking those government documents to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks are done through a military court-martial and being conducted through the military court system. The court docket is completely sealed. So we only know about the seizure of the Twitter communications because of Twitter, essentially. Because Twitter, the company, decided that was information worth publicizing, that this was something that they wanted to curtail. But we don't know the full scope of it at all, by any means, and many journalists are suing on that behalf. So this was a case of government seizing records from journalists without them knowing it, or rather communications between journalists and their source that were out there, without the journalists themselves knowing it. And yet at the time, unfortunately, yes, it's true that there were some people defending Assange and his right as a sort of crusader journalist, admittedly unconventional, to seek out that information, to seek out those sources, and to have that be privileged. But for the most part, including by folks like Bill Keller at the New York Times, who was at that time the managing editor, we're condemning Assange or even outright mocking him. And the fact of the matter is, regardless of how much more sensitive the documents he was releasing were, the issue in question is the ability for reporters to communicate freely with their sources and be passive recipients of, or for that matter, active recipients of any information, regardless how classified.